concerns. Mr. Renker, I'm going to start off with the questions, obviously, in the order of the witnesses as you all testified. Why the difference on the retainage? As far as, and I will tell you now, my association of building contractors, I always complain about, the 5% and such. I can only imagine if it was 10%, but they're a pretty vocal group. But what is the reason for the difference in the double in it?
I wish I knew. I've been an architect for 34 years, and this is the first contract I've ever had retainage on my fees. In every other case, we present a product, that product's reviewed and approved, and then we invoice for our services. So, to have a 10% retainage was a big surprise to me.
Right, and I'm sure it's been asked. I'm sure there's an answer out there. And what we'll do is we'll pose the question for you and see if we get a response. Now, you'd be surprised. We're members of Congress, right, Mr. Westmoreland? But many times, it's the old thing about, if they don't wait you out, they'll wear you out. So we're familiar with some of that. But let's try to get that response. I just was wondering why the difference. I do want to talk to you about something you may not touched on completely, and that is the reverse auction and the fact that it might conflict with the qualifications-based selection process. Can you give me some information from your perspective?
Well, from my perspective, architects and engineers are selected on the QBS system where we submit our qualifications, and the agencies review in depth our qualifications as past performance and select us on the basis of who they feel can do the best job. And at that point, we negotiate our fees. The reverse auction process is contrary to that Brooks Act in that they're asking for fees up front, I understand, and then they post them, and whoever is the last one to, the one who's willing to go the lowest, I guess, gets the contract. But I honestly am not personally familiar with completely with the reverse auction system.
Yeah, I think that bears looking into, at what cost. I understand the motivation on a reverse auction. It kind of makes sense in the most simplest of concepts, but in practice, you may not end up accomplishing what you really want to accomplish. There's a lot more than everybody racing to see who's the lowest bidder on this thing.
From an architect-engineer standpoint, where we provide services that involve health, safety, and welfare of individuals, going on, and I think that's the reason for the QBS system, going on the low price and trying to remove services on that basis just doesn't seem wise.
I sure do. Thank you, Mr. Renker. Mr. Vandepute, I know you're going to be in total agreement with Mr. Scribner here regarding the home office deduction and what that means, and I think we have legislation out there that's addressing it. We may have some other legislation that may be spearheaded by the chair of this full committee, which is, of course, Nydia Velasquez, to whom I referred earlier. And I can tell you, you don't have a stronger advocate for small businesses than Chairwoman Velasquez, and so that is a good sign, and I'm hoping that we're going to be able to do something, especially with the tremendous support that we have from Mr. Sullivan's office. Can you think of any other regulation that impacts you that you would say, well, this is on my mind, I think there's ways of streamlining it, and what is the best vehicle for you to make your opinion known as to what is detrimental to you in the operation of your business that is not truly necessary in any regulatory scheme?
Yeah, I think there's probably more than we would have time to talk about. I think one of the things that I've come up on, it seems that when you're looking at federal wage an hour, when you look under the reality of how business operates today and what goes on, their definitions of what's exempt employee and non-exempt employee, I don't think necessarily reflects reality. I once had a run-in with them where I had 5 employees doing the same thing, and they said because one of those employees had a degree, they were a professional, the other 4 weren't, which doesn't make an awful lot of sense to me under all sorts of concepts of fairness and equal pay and equal this and that. The fact that the federal government would discriminate against somebody because they did or didn't have a degree was a surprise to me, but I was told that's the way the regulation is drawn. And I think that would be one area where the rules are very complicated, and when you're a business owner trying to do things right, and trying to be careful when you're employing people and you're being fair. Again, as a small business owner, when every time I want to do something, the first call I have to make is to the attorney, my attorney, to interpret this rule. And of course, as soon as they pick up the phone, the meter starts running. And as small businesses, we don't have staff attorneys. We don't have staff accountants. We have to go out into the marketplace and play retail.
And again, thank you very much. Mr. Scribner, you come out with basically, and I wanted to make sure that I touched on this, because we've been able to identify, obviously, problem areas that have come up to the forefront, again, because of what Mr. Sullivan was able to initiate in his own office. The big thing is this thing about this home office deduction, and like I said, and just in my over-dinner discussion with a tax judge, he seemed to agree. I mean, you are truly at risk. So we have legislation out there, and I can ask Mr. Vandeput too, and I think you also agree in your testimony, Pete, that maybe it would just be a standard deduction, maybe cut through all this, and if you're audited, you're audited. I mean, there's not much anybody can do about things like that, but nevertheless, rather than the strictness of it, that just basically disallows you.
Mr. Chairman, I can speak for myself. I'm in a what I call a perpetual business, constantly in motion with buyers and sellers and contracts and accounting and legal aspects. And the biggest challenge that I face as a small business person is the ability to try to hold it all together, so to speak. In other words, to have the time to address all of the issues and concerns I need to address to run my business. And that, I think, is the big issue and would be the advantage of the standardized home office deduction. It just is very unwieldy and very time-consuming for me as a small business person to keep up with tracking the various home office expenses and trying to understand those rules. So I think that is the perfect advantage of the standard home office deduction. And I think that it's my understanding that 27%, only 27% of small businesses actually take the deduction. And I think that's because of a few of the things I addressed in my comments, the fears they have about IRS audit and just the overall complication of and the time involved in taking the deduction.
The other thing may not be related to Dave's hearing, but I wanted to touch on it quickly because of your own background. Before you were with Keller Williams, you say you were, was it with a community bank?
I was, yes, I was in commercial banking for 12 years. I was CEO of a small East Texas bank. And,
because Mr. Westmoreland and I, for a future hearing, we were considering actually bringing in our independent community bankers and seeing what's going on out there in the credit markets, the impact, the regulatory scheme, because first and foremost, we always think that they truly represent the access to capital within the community. So, again, your own experience, we may draw on that. We may call you back and just, there's a reason that you're in real estate today, and I'm not saying that you weren't happy as a banker. But
I welcome the opportunity.
Mr. Santos, it's very interesting because you're talking about, obviously, an activity that is very, it's very specific to different areas of the country when we're talking about the explosives, the use of them and such. And it is amazing, though, that you pointed out that you haven't had any real updates on regulations and such for a period in excess of 30 years. And technology does move forward, practices, best practices change it, and such. What would be the reason for this inactivity? It seems like, and I know there's always staffing, there's always budgetary constraints and such, but why haven't we moved forward? And the reason for that is that, I believe in regulation, but I think we all understand for safety reasons and leveling playing fields and all that, and standards, reasonable, effective regulation. And these are outdated that we're talking about. These are burdensome, onerous, and such. But why do you believe that you would have, in your particular field, such neglect over such an extended period of time?
Well, I